Welcome in, y'all. Free agency and the draft are just around the corner. Free agency quite a bit closer. And I wanted to take a look at the biggest needs for every team heading into this offseason. Some teams have bigger needs, some teams have more needs, but we'll try to focus on the most important. We're going to kick it off with the AFC in this one, go division by division, team by team. We got the AFC North here kicking off, the division won by Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers this past year. Ravens and Bengals were dealing with some injuries. Browns, struggled like usual. But let's start with the Bengals in the top left. So for them, it's kind of, defense in general, right? But, a specified edge, especially with the whole Hendrickson, thing they got going on there. But, defensively is obviously where this team needs help. We've known it for a while. They could use some O-line touch-ups as well. That's also been a big thing for this team. But it's really the big focus is defense. You have Joe Burrow, you have Jamar Chase, you have T. Higgins. I mean, they're fine on offense. They can get the job done. They can move the ball. They need to be able to stop other teams. We've known this for years now. They got to touch up. They have cap space to do it. Pittsburgh this year, the QB's in a question mark in parentheses there because, what's Rodgers doing? At this point, I'm actually starting to think he's coming back. For a while, at the end of the season, it felt like this was his last ride, but it's starting to sound like he can come back. If that's the case, they don't need a QB this year. They need to focus on a wide receiver too. They need another weapon out there behind Metcalf. The offense was very lackluster this year. The running game couldn't get going. You could touch up the O-line as well. Like I said, a lot of these teams have several needs, but I think having another weapon out there is a big thing. It's going to help this offense. The defense is already fairly solid, especially when healthy. Baltimore, I could have gone a couple different ways with this one, but I'm going to focus on offensive guard here for them. Kind of a weak, position this past year. It was kind of a down year in general for Baltimore, even when healthy, it felt like. But they have the talent on both sides of the ball all around. Very few major weak spots, right? Every team has some weak spots, but not as many glaring needs. Offensive guard is definitely a big one. And, you also could have considered wide receiver on here. They haven't been the most pass-heavy team. They're definitely a run-focused team, but they don't have too many weapons outside. Hopkins, how good is he anymore? Flowers is trying to carry the weight, but they could use another receiver as well. But this Baltimore team should be pretty darn good regardless. And then Cleveland, I just kept it simple. I wasn't even going to get specific here. I'm just going offense. They need help all around. I don't think they don't really have the quarterback situation figured out. They'll probably, trot out Sanders for another year. I don't know that he's like the long-term solution there. He's fine for the time being. They have no major threats out wide. They've kind of, the running backs they actually performed pretty well this past year. But they need more firepower on offense. They need more playmakers. The defense, we saw how good it was this year. You got Myles Garrett back there. This was a defense of a team that could, make a run in the playoffs, but the offense is so incapable that it's actually insane. And they need to fix that side of the ball right now. Their offense has been rough for a while. We'll move on over to the AFC East, a division that had a surprise champion this year, the New England Patriots. Bills also made the postseason, but it's going to be more the same this year. Buffalo and New England probably competing at the top of the division, and New York and Miami will, they'll be at the bottom, not just the bottom of the division, but the bottom of the league. They got a lot of holes, a lot of things to fix. But for the Jets, I'll start with them. It's the quarterback. And if I made this video for the last 15 years, you could maybe just have that same item on here. They have so many holes, so many issues. But at the end of the day, you have to have a guy under center that's going to be able to get the job done. And you have to stick with somebody. You have to let them grow, develop. This Jets organization has failed time and time again doing that. They got to figure out that position. Historically, they have not had great quarterbacks. Like I said, A lot of issues, but quarterback I think is number one. And they have an offense that has some pieces there, right? You have a Brees Hall, you have a Garrett Wilson. Now, will they be there through the offseason? We'll see. Things can happen, trades can happen. I don't know. But they need a franchise guy, and I don't know how they're going to get that. Buffalo, wide receiver / edge. You could go either one. They need to get more pressure on the opposing quarterbacks. Obviously, I feel like the defense took a step back. And at wide receiver, I feel like Josh Allen, despite how amazing he's been, it really hasn't commonly had just threats out wide, right? A lot of just no name guys, not no name, they're not no names, but they're not household names, playing wide receiver. Imagine you get him a top tier guy out there, see what they could do. I think that'd be a huge advantage to them. But the Bills are right there. They're right there. They just got to get it done in the playoffs. We'll see if they can finally do that this year. They got some offseason additions to make for sure. New England, for a team that went to the Super Bowl, they have a lot of holes. And I think that just goes to how well they were coached this year and how well Drake May played. A good coach and quarterback can hide a lot of holes on a team, and it did this year, especially on the offensive side of things. On the offensive line, it was not good. We saw it in the Super Bowl. Seattle got all over May. Teams were getting all over May all season. He was sacked quite a bit, pressured quite a bit. And at wide receiver, you got some people out there that are fine, but I don't think they really have anyone that really scares defenses. They don't have like a true elite number one, and that would be an absolute game changer for this offense. And I think they have the tools to go and get something close to that. And then Miami, and this could be a theme for a lot of bad teams because I think it can be where you start the groundwork, but quarterback. They need to figure out what they're doing. They're obviously, it seems like they're moving on from Tua. What do you do next? Although it seems like it's probably going to be a bridge quarterback. I've heard like a Malik Willis tossed out there. Although he looked pretty good with Green Bay, so maybe more than a bridge. We'll see. They have a lot of holes, like I said. It's tough when, you have a team that just isn't that great. They're falling apart a little bit at the seams. And it's like, where do you even start? But at the end of the day, you're not going to win many games, many playoff games, many Super Bowls without a good quarterback. Moving on now to the AFC South. An interesting division this past year, which ultimately ended up with the Jaguars taking the division, which is funny, 6-7 weeks into the season, maybe even further along than that, 8 or 9 weeks. The Jaguars weren't really on the radar. You were like, all right, they're playing all right. They might sneak into a wild card. They haven't seemed, that dominant, but they're not bad. The Colts were playing super well. And then all of a sudden, the Colts just fell apart. Obviously, Daniel Jones got hurt, but the Texans and Jags took over. But let's get into the positions here. Tennessee, as you can see there, it already popped up. We got wide receiver. I was looking through it for them. There's a lot of different spots you could focus on. But at the end of the day, the one I settled on for them is receiver. Because you can plug some holes on the defense that absolutely need to be plugged, don't get me wrong. But you have a young quarterback out there that you need to develop. If you got to stick with your guy, he showed some flashes this year. You cannot hang him out to dry. Get him an offense he can produce with. Let him grow. Get him a top receiver. And, you can really get him to progress. Otherwise, you're setting him up for failure. Jacksonville, interior defensive line is their spot here. The Jaguars were an interesting team this past year. I feel like the offense, honestly, underperformed a little bit for the pieces they have. I feel like they have a pretty good offense. I think the second half of the season, they really turned it on, and I think that's around the time Lawrence improved. You could also, they could use some O-line pieces as well here. But interior defensive line, I think, is the biggest spot of need for the Jaguars at the moment. And then moving on to Indianapolis, defensive end here, edge. That's one of their biggest spots of needs. They need to get more pressure on opposing quarterbacks. That's a pretty common theme, through a lot of teams. It's a very crucial position. Games are won in those trenches. If you're not going to get to, if you can't protect your quarterback and you can't get to the opposing quarterback, you're not going to win many games. So yeah, that is a common theme in this one. The Colts, a healthy quarterback could be something that's listed here because, they're going to start out the year likely without Daniel Jones. They're going to have to fill that gap. Where are they going to go? They're going to go Riley Leonard. They're going to go, Anthony Richardson. They got to figure that out, but I assume they'll go with an in-house move there as a little stopgap for the time being. Then Houston, this was a tough one. I think you could easily go offensive line here, but they need a running back. They need someone who can get the run game going. Like I said, that can work in tandem with the offensive line. You could have maybe just put run game overall here, because they were not super efficient at it this year. A lot of pressure was on Stroud or whoever was back there playing quarterback. And Stroud struggled mightily, in the back half, especially in that postseason game in New England. It did not go well. It had some center issues in the prior playoff game. But this is a team that is really darn close. The defense is elite. They have great wideouts. CJ Stroud, we know he can get it together. Just touch up the O-line, get you a really solid running back, and this team can be right back in the mix, maybe for a Super Bowl. Then moving on to the AFC West. A very interesting division this past year, given that the Chiefs took third and missed the playoffs. Raiders with that number 1 overall pick. Chargers snuck into the playoffs, and the Broncos did win the division, had the 1 seed. But believe it or not, the Chargers have the 3rd best odds to win this division this year, or the Broncos have the 3rd best odds, which is surprising. Chargers, I believe, have the best. But we'll start with the Chiefs. You saw it in the top left there, running back. I went through different positions. I was reading stuff on the Chiefs, and there's a few defensive positions that they might need, but at the end of the day, here's the reason I'm going with running back for the Chiefs. Is their games that they lost against some of the league's best defenses, you had them scoring, 17 points, 19 points, 13 points. That's not the Chiefs that we know, the Chiefs that was winning Super Bowls. And they need more than just Mahomes out there. The receivers could use some work as well, but they have a lot of potential there. Running back, they need to go get one. There's a lot of options out there, and I think they absolutely are capable of tackling that need. Kelsey, is he going to retire? Are they going to need another tight end? Possibly. Kind of the entire offense outside of Mahomes and the O-line could be touched up. But we'll move on to the Raiders, and, I'm not going to put QB because we know they're going to go get Mendoza with that 1st overall pick. So I'm going to put offensive line for the Raiders. It struggled mightily. The pass rush was all over whoever was playing quarterback, whichever game it was for the Raiders. And Genty didn't have near as much room to run. He struggled to start the season. And, a lot of times a running back can only be as good as their offensive line, and it was not good this year. They got to touch that up. The Raiders are making the right moves in the right direction. A lot of cap space, 1st overall pick. They could be closer than you think, but they got to get to work. Offensive line's a big spot. Chargers, similar interior offensive line for them. The offensive line was brutally injured this year for the Chargers. Herbert was running for his life. He was getting sacked left and right. And they need to shore up the middle of that offensive line. The tackles, should be decent, especially with, if they can stay healthy. But if you can protect Herbert, they're gonna have a darn good year. I think they're 5th or 6th in Super Bowl odds, which is insane. But I absolutely see why when they can stay healthy. And, you could toss in, a couple weapons at wide receiver for them as well. But they got some decent stuff going on out there that I don't think it's as big of a need. And then we'll settle on our last one here, the Denver Broncos. Simply put, I'm just saying weapons. They need some weapons. They need some juice on offense. It doesn't feel like they just have playmakers out there. It feels like they're just the stats are kind of show that kind of average, slightly above average on offense. They don't really lack anywhere. The O line's actually exceptional. A very good offensive line. Bo Nix is fine. Is maybe slightly above average NFL starter. The wide receivers are fine, running backs fine, but they were the 1 seed this year. They have an elite defense. If they can get themselves some weapons, man, they could really build on that. And I think, like so many other of these teams, they have the tools to do that. They don't have too many spots that they need to shore up in this offseason. So that's what I have for the AFC in this one. Let me know what y'all think. I'll be doing the NFC as well, of course. Free agency coming up really soon. This offseason's getting underway, and the draft will be here before we know it.